Hi everyone, just checking in on the Relics side of things again. This is I think my fourth or maybe third or fourth video for Relics now. But there is some really exciting news with regards to the game system. As some of you may well be aware, that Tor Gaming are currently testing for a new version of the rules, and what they've done, which I think is a really great idea, is that they've been gradually releasing rules and updates and changes through their Facebook group for the community to play test, really. And I know I've started with a couple of the chaps that I know that play, working through some of the rules. So this is my take on where the game is changing, really, how cool those changes are, and I have to say some of them are excellent. From the games that we've played so far, they've really added to the game and not took anything away, if that makes sense, because I know there's a kind of it must be quite easy when you're developing these types of rules to just throw stuff in without really considering the overall delivery of the system to the audience that play it, really. So the Mark 1 set of rules, the version 1 set of rules, when you think about it in the lifespan of a set of rules, so when Tor Gaming first came out and they produced this rule set, actually when you think about it, that initial set really is almost like a beta, really, of what's to come, because inevitably no one has, from my knowledge, ever produced a war game that's been perfect off the bat, and I don't think it's actually possible without getting a lot of testing in to really get it. So the version 1 really as a new game, when it first came out, I suppose you could say it in effect has been a kind of a beta or a living beta test for the last however long it's been out. So what that's meant is that I think over time, Gavin and the team at Tor have been looking at how they can effectively produce a version 2, which is going to take all of the really fun, cool, quirky, interesting parts of their already decent game and sort of propel it on to the next level, really, and streamline the game, make it smoother to play, but also add lots of extra depth into it through various different sort of avenues, really. So I'm going to talk about some of these changes. I hope I don't bore you too much on these, and how I think that they've made some really good decisions when you play the game, with the way that they've changed the rule system, I think, to make it just generally a better gaming experience, really. So I'm not going to harp back into, oh well, in the old game this did this a lot. What I'm going to do is concentrate on where these changes fall. So for the most part, the game system has remained its sort of standard solid self. So you still roll doubles to hit things, you move in a similar way, you cast spells in a similar way. The real big changes, and I'm going to start with these because I think these are really the way to go. And if you can hear me rustling, it's because I've got my pack of beta Relics beta testing document for version 2 in front of me. So yeah, the real big change, I think, has come in sort of two different forms. The first is under something that Tor Gaming call in their game advantages. Now this is a really clever, and I think this is the cleverest thing that they've produced in terms of additions to the system. And the other is that your stats as a model now, you basically get a save in effect, which wasn't there before. So again, it's an extra thing that they're adding in, but when I get to it, you'll see that it doesn't actually detract from how fast and brutal combat is. What it does is it adds an extra layer of complexity and depth to the rules. Still as quick, as long as you know what you're doing. You still rattle through combats really brutally, which is as it should be with this type of game. It's just it adds an extra thinking process for the gamers that are playing, an extra risk reward when you're trying to figure out what nasty combinations you're trying to put together to basically screw your opponent over. So let's talk about advantages first, because I think this is brilliant, and this is the bit that I think has really excited me the most about playing the game. So first of all, what are advantages? There are in essence a pool of bonuses that you can utilize at any point during the game to get sort of two sorts of advantages really. One's classified as a general advantage, which both players have access to, so at any point there are a standard set of extra abilities that you can layer onto your attacks or your defense, or however you're going to work it basically. Casting spells, you can get bonuses, just general stuff around the game. So there for both of you, you can both use those. Also, which I think is brilliant, is that now on the stats of each model, so I'm just going to turn the page here, find one with a couple, here we go. On the stats of each model now, you get a number of advantages that are unique to that type of model or that unit. So I've just got one here, Mercenary Profile Banished Knight. Okay, so he also has, on top of being able to utilise the general advantages, he has got Mirrored Stance, Outnumbered, and All the Better. So they are extra abilities that are unique to him that add really an infinite number of combinations really, when you consider the sheer volume of models that you could put into your force at any one time. So you can stack and layer all these abilities. Absolutely brilliant fun trying to figure out the best way to do things. And as a long time gamer, it's really good to sort of thrash that out on paper as well when you design your army list. So there's two sides to it. Now, it's not just a case of you can use these advantages and tough to your opponent. The way that it works is this pool, this set of counters, you can buy an amount equal to a percentage of your army value when you're designing your list. So that gives you something that you can use straight away without any kind of risk. You can also use any of these advantages at any point during the game, but, and this is a big but, depending on what you roll on a dice when you decide to use one of these advantages, you may well end up giving your opponent a freebie that he can then use to screw you back in return. So what you need to weigh up is when not only you're going to use these abilities to get the most out of them, but also is the risk of rolling a 1 or a 2 to give my opponent a free one in return enough to justify using it for the ability. In the few games that we've played and we've been testing these rules, it's quite interesting how that works. And in the first game that I played, my opponent actually gave me advantages which then really did knock him about later on in the game. So yeah, on top of the free ones, there are these ones that gambling and an extra level of kind of resource management that wasn't previously in the game. It doesn't slow the game down really. In fact, it's quite fun discussing them as you're alternating through your units, because you know the good thing about Relics, if you're alternating, you're deciding in your opponent's turn in effect what unit you're going to activate next. So as part of that in your head, you're kind of planning out, oh, I'm going to perhaps use a general advantage this turn to try and do something horrible to a specific unit that's going to be a bit of a thorn in the side later on. So you can still quite rapidly move your stuff around. These kind of effects are free to use at any point, so both you and your opponent can throw them at each other simultaneously, in effect, if you want to. Great bit of fun. Love the rule. It makes the game really have that extra bit. I think it's absolutely amazing rule. So well done, Tor, for the Advantages edition. That's something that I really do think is going to help the game in terms of depth and complexity, but still keep it, you know, relatively straightforward, and also have that communication thing with your opponent where you're permanently bantering backwards and forwards about what you're going to be doing, which I really enjoy. So that's a really good one. The other bit, the armor save, is quite interesting, because again, in the old rules you would be weighing dice to try and roll doubles, and your opponents would have a defense value, don't get me wrong, and that defense value would affect the dice pool that you've got, but it's a fairly simple mechanic in terms of maths to be able to figure out pretty much on the spot what you need to do to get the amount of dice that you need. That wasn't a bad thing, you know, it works and it was all good. But now having a separate defense roll, so the way it works is I roll my dice to attack you, so I have an attack value and in terms of volume of dice that I throw, and then a number of attacks that a model makes. And as an opponent, you get a defense value, which is kind of represented in effect by a save. So if I look at another character, some Nick, he's got a defense of 5+, which means on a 5 or more, he will basically negate the hit that has just been made. Now, for those of you who have played Relics a while, you know that it's not easy to be good at scoring a number of hits consistently, because it's about getting a number of dice per attack. Having an extra save on there means you really have to think about what you allocate in terms of attacking models and what abilities you layer on. Remember, the advantages can give you bonuses to hitting somebody and affecting, in effect, the value of their save. And whether you go all out to make sure someone doesn't get a save at all, or you allow them a certain amount of save based on the buffs that you do, is all a big part of the game now. And I really like that kind of 2 layers of attacking and also defending it. It's one of those where your opponent gets to use his advantages to potentially counter how powerful your attacks are. You're then having to counter that with your advantages and your attributes, which is in effect a list of stuff that your model comes with anyway that can be used depending on what it is. You're trying to link all these things together to think, well, actually, you know, I could potentially move St. Nick's save to a 6+, which means he's far less likely to rebound any attacks that I put on him. And then the St. Nick player is thinking, well, I can do this, I can cast that spell, I can do that beforehand, which means that my 5+ save in effect is going to go down to a 3+ save. So it's kind of planning and again managing what you want to survive by buffing the defense. And generally what we found is that if you're really heavily buffing the defensive side, it's very hard to be very powerful in attacking, and vice versa. So if you're going to go all out for attack, it's very tricky to then be able to take a punch in return, because every time you're using advantages, unless you're just going to go crazy and you know, not care about it too much, you end up giving your opponent advantages in return, 1 in 3 on average, that they then use to their advantage and you can't do anything about. So yeah, having this extra sort of armor save is brilliant. Just trying to think of any other major changes really. I mean, I can do a separate kind of video log. I'll do one on magic and a few other bits and pieces. But as a whole, they're the 2 things that we've found so far that have really streamlined the way that the game plays. It's relatively straightforward and it makes perfect sense when you play it, but it does add an extra level of gameplay that wasn't there before, which is great, because although Relics was a pretty solid system to start with, you know, I just think that adding this in has made the communication in the game, the way you play against somebody, and how much fun and the kind of the crazy kind of story that gets built whenever you play a war game, it really helps develop that story in the minds of the people that are playing it. Unless I'm just the only weird one that comes up with weird stories in their head when they're playing games. So yeah, I just thought I'd run those ones through you, just flicking through. I mean, everything else really was there in some way before. You know, again, it's one of those, the double mechanic's still there, they've not taken that out, everything else is fairly similar. So yeah, that's basically my run through of the changes to Tor Gaming's Relics version 2. If you've got any questions or interest in playing the game, then give us a shout. The group on the Facebook page are brilliant and they're always willing to help. You know, if you're not sure, proxy some models and give the rules, which are free to download off the Tor Gaming website, a run through. If you have any questions or want to get in touch, either find me on Facebook on the link below or drop a message on here and I'll try and respond to you. Thanks very much. Cheers, bye.